Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. This is the first webinar of 2016, and I'm happy to see that there is a really high amount of people joining. That's very good to see. This webinar is about Preflight. It is an introductory webinar, so we will try to avoid really technical stuff for now. The idea is that in the next 45 minutes to 1 hour, I'll give you an overview of what Preflight actually is and so on. So let's have a look. Like I said, this is the Preflight webinar. There are a number of webinars coming up that might be interesting for the people that, for all of you who joined today as well. The first one is next week. That is a webinar on how to create standardized output, standardized PDF and PostScript and many other things from Adobe InDesign or Quark Express, featuring Axio Made to Print. And then 2 weeks from now is something that would be a very good follow-up webinar to look at if this one is interesting for you. That one is entitled Evolutions in Preflight Standards, and where this webinar gives an overview of what Preflight is. That webinar on January 20th will go into more detail on which standards exist, what is used today, what is being created and will probably be used tomorrow in more modern workflows. So it's a follow-up, if you want, to the more generic Preflight story that we are going to cover today. So keep those in mind. On the 4ps.com website, you can already find invitations to both of those webinars. The Axio Made to Print one is only in English. Evolutions in Preflight Standards will be both in English on January 20th and in Dutch on January 21st. For those of you who have not joined a webinar with me before, if you look at your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a section where you can ask questions. You're all muted as there are so many of you. It would not be practical to have everyone speak up. But there is a questions section in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you have questions, just enter them there. Probably I will only have time to look at them at the end of the webinar so that it doesn't interfere with my presentation and demo too much. But if you have questions, just enter them as they come up, and at the end of the webinar I'll have a look and we'll get all of those answered. What are we going to talk about today? This is a very short summary, starting with what is Preflight exactly, why, when, and how, a little bit on standards still, and on how to make it easy for yourself. Really just a taster of what is available there. As I said, 2 weeks from now, we're going to go into much more detail on that part. And then there will be a demo with Callus PDF Toolbox to show what the Preflight process typically is, what you can find in profiles. We'll talk about all of that, and so on. So expect about, I think, 10 to 15 minutes of presentation, and after that we'll do a demo, and then we'll see if there are any questions that we can get answered as well. So let's get started with this. Preflight is a term that, as most of you probably know, was derived from the airline industry, and the idea is that before you take flights, you actually check whether the plane is okay. And there is something called a pre-flight checklist that a pilot normally has to fill out before they are allowed to do a takeoff. And it's very, very similar to what happens in graphic arts when you do pre-flight. There is typically also a list of things that you would like to check before you send a PDF file for whatever the intention of that PDF file is, whether it's an ad or it's something in large format or it's something that is a printed a package or of some kind. In all cases, there is a list of things that you would like to check on that PDF before you send it to production. And that process is called Preflight. So whenever you take a look at the file that you're going to use, the document that you're going to use, And it doesn't necessarily even have to be a PDF, of course. But when you have a document that you want to use, the process of checking that document to make sure it's fit for whatever it's going to be used for, that process is called Preflight. And it's not necessarily limited to printed material, although it's started in that market, of course, to check things that were going to be printed on a press of some sort. But it's not limited to that. If you're going to post something on the internet, if you're going to use a PDF file in the context of a mobile application, for example, then those kinds of PDF files also have to obey a set of rules in order to be good for use. And Preflight can definitely be used for those kinds of processes as well. And this is fairly obvious, it is different for different workflows. Of course, whether you are going to print a very small ad in a newspaper, or you're going to print something that will cover the side of a bus or a train, for example, the requirements for those types of documents are going to be totally different. And the idea of Preflight is that you come up with a set of rules that matches the use of the files that you have. And that those rules will be, of course, different for different workflows. Now, when do you Preflight? And that's something that, it's a question that that very often comes up, and it's often in the context of someone working on a document in Adobe InDesign or in Quark Express, and then at some point that gets converted typically to a PDF file, and that PDF file goes from one party to the other, and then at some point that PDF file gets printed. So at what points in that process should you Preflight? And the answer is actually that as many times as possible where it makes sense. And that's a bit of a dual answer if you want. But if you have a native document, there are a number of things that you can detect in a native document that are really hard to detect once the document has been converted to PDF. So best practice would be to do Preflight on your native document. That's not what we are going to be talking about here, and also not what we're going to be showing in the demo. But if you have native documents, there are tools that you can use to Preflight those native documents. There is something built into Adobe InDesign Preflight that you can use. There are applications like Marksware Flight Check, for example. There are a number of tools that you can use to Preflight your native documents. And if you have the chance to do so, then that would be a really good idea. Once you've generated PDF out of your Quark Express or Adobe InDesign document, again, it would be a very good moment to do a Preflight and make sure that that whole process has gone well. But again, remember that it's not just about the process. Even if the way you convert that InDesign document or Quark Express document into PDF is a very good way, the best way that you have available, it might still be so that there are elements inside of your native document that cannot be converted to a PDF in a good way. So that check that you do on the PDF file is really crucial, even though your InDesign document might be very well constructed to begin with. And then in general, whenever there is a workflow transition, if you want, so whenever you get documents that come from the outside, someone sending you advertisements, someone sending you parts of a document that you're going to further work on, in any of those cases, it's a good idea to check the files that come in. And on the other side, whenever you deliver files to the next step in a workflow or to someone else, to a printer or to a publisher, it's a very good idea and often, in fact, a requirement of the person that you will be working with, a very good idea to Preflight those files as well. So whenever you have a big transition or a big change to a document, if you want, or to the workflow, it's a good idea to build in that Preflight step. And how you do that is up to you. What we'll look at in the demo is one particular tool, and it's a manual tool that can check a document for you. But of course, there are also automated tools that can be built into the workflow that you're using so that you don't lose a lot of time by doing this. And in many cases, you'll find that if you submit files to someone, for example, that they will already be using a web portal or an application that has some sort of Preflight built into that application. So all of that should be obvious. At least that's what I think. It sounds very obvious that you need to check the work that you're doing. So why am I saying all of this? Well, if you look at questionnaires that have been done over the years, and I'm talking over the last 20 years, I've been involved with Preflight tools since 1996, then what comes up every time is that there are still a relatively high percentage of people who do not use any kind of Preflight in their workflow. The last set of numbers that I've looked at said that about 20% of people does not do Preflight at all. And even more people don't do it for all documents or on a regular basis, or do it with a tool that is really designed for that. Opening a document, even if it is in Adobe Acrobat, really is no good form of Preflight. There are a lot of things that you cannot visually check, and you have to use a Preflight application to look at the details. So that's why I'm repeating all of this. It is still today not obvious that files should be going through quality control before they go into production, while it should be obvious. Now, if you look at those people that do check, so those 80% on the left-hand side that do check, there are also numbers on what amount of problems do they find in files that are preflighted. So if I ask people who preflight files, how many errors do you find in documents? Or how many of the documents that come through that preflight application give errors, serious problems? Then what you're looking at here is a breakdown of the answer. What you have on the right-hand side there, the 1%, that is people that say all of my documents have problems. In that case, I would say that there is probably also something wrong with their workflow that needs to be looked at, but because that's a very extreme case. But you see that there are still 3% of people saying that most documents have problems. And there are 25 that say more than half of the documents that come in have some sort of problem that we need to look at. Those numbers are actually quite high. And even if you're in the good end of this pie chart, look at the 21% that says, I only have a few documents that have problems during preflight. Even if you're in that section of the pie chart, if you know how costly production errors can be once the file actually gets to the stage where it is printed, if that happens with 1 document out of 100, or 5 documents out of 100, or whatever the number is, it's still a very real problem that causes lots of waste of material and money. So Preflight is a way to avoid that and to make sure that if there's going to be a problem with those documents, that you know it sooner in the workflow and you can take corrective action sooner in the workflow. So don't assume that we're just running this Preflight because someone said so at some point that it needed to be done. All of the statistics that you find today suggests that the number of problems in PDF files has not significantly gone down over the last 20 years. Quality of PDFs increases, but the complexity of workflow increases as well. And so what you find is that there are still a lot of errors found during that preflight process. Okay, so that's all very, very nice. But then how do I do that? Well, I've already talked about profiles, and I've mentioned standards at some point as well. And it's important to understand what those two concepts are. That's what's going to come back later in the slides, in the demo, and also 2 weeks from now. A standard or a specification, both words are used, define what a PDF file should and should not do. So if I look at a PDF file, if I'm using a PDF file for print, I know that there are probably color spaces that I want. There are probably color spaces that I don't want people to use in such a PDF file. Well, a standard or a specification would define what those color spaces are that you can use or cannot use. That defines the rules. Why the two words? Well, standards is mostly associated with a standards organization such as the ISO. A specification will more frequently be used with a rule set that comes from something that is not a real standards organization, but perhaps a national body that delivers its own rules for a particular country. So there isn't that much difference, but that's why sometimes you'll hear me say standard and other times I'll talk about specifications. If you look at a standard or at a specification and you try to create something that can be used in software around that, that's what we call a profile. So a Preflight profile implements such a standard or specification in software. And the importance of a Preflight profile is that it lets you encode the rules that you want to follow. It lets you say, if you find this in a PDF, that's a piece of information that I want to know. If you find this, you should give me a warning because that might be a problem and someone will have to look at that. If you find these things, then those have to be reported as error messages because those are things that I know will definitely cause a problem in production. Of course, software is very different. One piece of software will not behave as another piece of software, but in general, you'll find that almost all Preflight software talks about profiles or rule sets or similar words to that. And in all cases, it is a collection of the rules that you want to check a PDF file on. And in most cases, that concept of warnings and errors will come back as well, and it almost always means the same. A warning is something to look at, but doesn't necessarily have to be a problem, and an error is something that typically will be a problem. So that's very common terminology, and even if the Preflight software that you're looking at or working with is not PDF Toolbox, then it is typically terminology that will come back in that piece of software as well. Another very important part of a profile, and that's also something that you will find in almost all technology that implements Preflight today, is the concept of, on the one hand, having detection of potential problems, so the Preflight part, if you want. And on the other hand, the concept of fixing those problems as well. Most Preflight software allows you to define both. And that means that you could build a profile that will only check the file. It only has checks. It will not touch the document at all. It will only report what might be a problem. But in most software, you can also build profiles that not only check, but also fix things immediately. And of course, it's a big difference. It's a difference because it's a matter of responsibility as well. If I touch a file by fixing it, I have to be really sure that I'm not making the problem worse by doing that. And very often I hear from people, well, isn't it safer to just detect problems and go back to the customer and say, Mr. Customer, this is wrong, you need to fix that. And of course, from a point of view of responsibility, it's much better to do that. Then the responsibility to deliver a good file is with the customer, and there is no chance that you will get blamed because you fixed something in a document and made a mistake while fixing it. But it's not always a possibility to do so. In many cases, it's much quicker to fix something than to simply detect it and throw the file back to where it came from. And much more importantly, whoever made that PDF file may not know how to fix it. They may not even understand what you're talking about. If you throw a technical Preflight message about, I don't know, transparency groups back to a creative person, then they very well might not understand what exactly the problem is. And even if they do understand what the problem is from a technical point of view, they might not be able to fix it. The software that they're using might not allow them to create a PDF file where that problem does not exist. So what you have to try to do, and that is the answer on the question, what should we fix? What you have to try to do is to define which things are not causing a liability by fixing them immediately. So which errors that I can find can be fixed by Preflight software without causing additional problems or additional liability. Some things, of course, cannot be fixed. If someone sends you a file and there is an image in there and that image is 36 dpi or whatever it is, and your requirement is to have 150 dpi images, there's no way you can fix that. Yes, you could upsample it, but that will generate fake information, and in terms of quality, that's typically not going to solve the real problem. So in some cases, you'll have a problem that you cannot fix. Image resolution is a very good example. Many problems around fonts are in the same category. And in those cases, the file will have to go back to the previous stage. You'll have to correct whatever the error was and then generate a new PDF file to use in your workflow. So in some cases, you simply cannot fix. And in other cases, it's dangerous to fix things automatically without having proper and sometimes very detailed inspection of the results. Let me give you an example. It's a difficult example in a sense because you can discuss about it quite a bit. But if someone sends me a file, a PDF file, and one of the fonts is not embedded, and I happen to have that font on my system, should I fix that automatically or not? Most of the Preflight software that you can use today will actually allow you to fix that. It will allow you to take the font that you have on your system and embed it in the PDF document. The question is that a good idea? The font might have the same name, but it might not actually be the same font internally. Some of the characters, some of the glyphs in the font might be different. The encoding of the font might be different. The widths of the different glyphs might be different. So it's with those kinds of fixes, there is often a solution to fix that without having to go back to the customer. But it also typically is not a solution I would recommend to do in an automated fashion. In that case, I would probably open up the file in an application such as PDF Toolbox or Adobe Acrobat, run a fix, and then very, very carefully evaluate whether the fix gave the correct result. So what should you fix? Well, you should look at what types of files you get, what types of errors you get, and what errors you feel are safe to fix. And all of that, of course, sounds like a lot of work, and it is. If you would, from scratch, start building your own set of rules, your own Preflight profile, you'll find that that is a really, really hard thing to do, because you have to come up with a rule set, you have to come up with a Preflight profile that translates that rule set in a set of checks and fix-ups. Now, fortunately, there are ways around all of that, and using standards is probably the way you can make your life easier the fastest. And the first standard that you're already using in the context of what we're talking about is, in fact, PDF. For those of you who don't know that, PDF is actually an ISO standard of itself. It used to be property of Adobe, and it used to be developed by Adobe, and Adobe is the one who invented it in 1993. But meanwhile, PDF has been transferred to the ISO committee, so International Standards Organization Committee, and PDF now is an ISO standard 32000. So if you're using PDF, you're already using a standard that will make your life easier, especially, of course, and that all of you will know, especially when you compare it to transferring native documents as we used to do 20 years ago. PDF is much easier because it was designed to be exchanged between systems and look the same on different systems and so on. However, PDF is still a very broad format. And one of the problems with it is that there are a lot of things that you can do in PDF that make no sense at all when you think in the terms of particular workflow. If I'm going to print a magazine or a newspaper and I get a PDF file that contains hyperlinks and video or audio fragments, then what do you want to do with those in the context of a newspaper? It's simply not valid content for that particular type of use. And what happened is that the ISO committee also started making a number of standards based on PDF for particular environments, and PDFX was the first of those standards. The X comes from blind exchange, and the reason it comes from blind exchange is that the PDFX standard was designed to allow you to create a PDF file that can be passed on between different players in a graphic arts workflow, from creation to publishing to a printer or whatever the different steps are. But that PDFX file, you should be able to transfer from one party to the other without having additional communication about that file. So you don't have to say, I'm sending you a file, but on page 2, you should make sure that the font that is used there is actually that and the color. No, all of that explanation should not be there. You should be able to just take the PDFX file and transfer it to someone else. That was the stated goal. And so what you find in PDFX, if you would read the technical documentation around it, is a long list of do's and don'ts for those PDF files. A PDFX file is not allowed to use video or audio, for example. And that solves the problem of what do I have to do with that video or audio file in the graphic arts workflow. Nothing really. You're not allowed to use it. So that is PDFX, and ISO has created a whole set of those PDF-based standards by now. You have PDFX for graphic arts, you have PDFA for archival, there is PDFVT for variable and transactional workflows. There's a whole set of those standards. And if you look at PDFX, there is a number of flavors of PDFX if you want for particular workflows as well. I'm not going to go into more detail on those. That's something for 2 weeks from now for that Preflight standards webinar. But just remember that those exist. And the reason for this drawing in this way is that PDFX, of course, is a subset of PDF. Each PDFX file is a PDF. Not every PDF file is a PDFX file. That's how these things work. And the idea behind it, again, is that if you use a PDFX file, you have a lot more chance on success than if you just send a printer your PDF file that doesn't obey to any kind of standard. So that's a good step in the right direction. Anything that is not graphic arts related is not supported or not allowed by PDFX. But it still leaves you with a number of problems because PDFX was written for the whole graphic arts industry. And I just a couple minutes ago gave you an example of a file that is an advertisement for a newspaper and another file that is to be used to print a huge banner on the side of a train or a plane or a bus. Well, those two files are going to have to follow different rules, but that cannot be expressed in PDFX because PDFX just sets the rules for the whole graphic arts community. And so what happened on top of PDFX is that the Gantt Workgroup, which is an international organization where you find vendors and lots of users and user associations in graphic arts, the Gantt Workgroup developed a set of specifications. And those specifications tell you that if you want to use a PDF in this particular type of workflow, for example, if you want to use it as an advertisement that is going into a magazine, then you should create that PDF file according to PDFX but with a number of additional rules imposed on it. So it further restricts what you are allowed to do in a PDF file if you're going to use it for that particular workflow. You can also see this drawing as a sort of pyramid. Every stage narrows what you are allowed to do. It imposes additional limitations and restrictions. And as such, the reliability increases as you go up. And then if that is still not good enough, if you're working in a particular workflow where you have additional demands on top of what is common in that space, in that market space, for example, then you can build your own rules on top of that. But now defining your own rules will be a lot easier because you take all of the work that has been done in the PDF standard, in the PDFX standard, in the Gantt workgroup standards, and you simply add the 1 or 2, maybe 5 or 10 additional rules that you want to impose on top of those standards. But the bulk of the work has been done by these standards organizations for you. So that's always the case. And I'm not saying that you always have to use Gantt workgroup profiles, but what I'm saying is that the more you go inside to that circle, so the more restrictions you apply, of course, the higher the reliability of the files will be and the higher chance you have that nothing will go wrong in production afterwards. Okay, so that's a lot of theory about around Preflight already. So let me go to an application that can do this. I could have done this in Adobe Acrobat as well. Adobe Acrobat has a Preflight plugin built into it, but that Preflight plugin is actually developed by Kala Software, and the tool that I'm using here, PDF Toolbox, is also developed by Kala Software. So I'm going to use the standalone application to show you what is meant with all of this theory. So let me open up a PDF document in PDF Toolbox. And what I've opened as well is the profile window. And I've talked about Preflight profiles and how Preflight profiles are a collection of things you want to check and potentially things you want to fix. And if you look at this list of profiles or categories of profiles that you see here, you're already going to recognize a number of the concepts that I talked about. There is a category here called PDFX. There is some others like PDFA or PDFVT that I mentioned. So all of these ISO standards have been translated into profiles. And if I open one of these categories, you'll see a list of the flavors in that profile. I told you that there are different flavors of PDFX, for example. Well, here you have them. PDFX 1A is the most commonly used today. PDFX4 is what is upcoming in the world. Again, we'll go into much more detail on the differences between those in the webinar we'll have 2 weeks from now. But for now, remember that you have profiles for these different standards. And what is also interesting is that I can see for PDFX1A, for example, I can see 2 types of profiles here, one called verify, the other one called convert. And that goes back to the checking and or fixing concept that I talked about. The verify profiles look at the PDF document. They will run a number of rules on the PDF document, but they will not change the document in any way. So the only thing they will do is tell you whether it's good or not good. The convert profiles in here will not only verify, but they will also try to convert this file that I have here to a valid PDFX1A file. Okay, so that's the ISO standards implemented into a profile. Now, before I use one of those profiles, let me also open the prepress section. The prepress section in PDF Toolbox, and this nomenclature, the namings of these things are, of course, application dependent. If you use something else than PDF Toolbox, you might very well have different categories or different names of profiles. But the prepress section in PDF Toolbox is where you find the profiles from the Gantt workgroup. And that means that if I look at this one, for example, magazine ads, you'll see that the description says verifies compliance with the recommendations of the Gantt PDF workgroup as defined in the magazine ads 1v4 specification. Magazine ads 1v4 is a specification document, a very technical document written by the Gantt workgroup that says, if I'm creating a PDF for printing in a magazine as an advertisement, then this is what it should obey to. And this profile is how PDF Toolbox can check whether PDF documents comply to that specification document. So I can take that profile and then I can use that on the document. So let me see if I have, let me think what document I have here. Yep, this is good. Let me see what happens here. If I do analyze, analyze means, again, I will not fix anything. I will only run checks on this document. If you run that, what actually happens is that PDF Toolbox looks at the rules embedded in that profile, and it runs all of those rules against all of the elements found inside of the PDF document. And in the end, and this is also very common to Preflight tools, you'll get some kind of report that says these are the things that are potentially a problem, these yellow exclamation mark thingies that you see here, and these are the things that are actually a problem. Some very good examples in here. You have resolution of color and grayscale images. So what this says is that there are images inside this document that have a resolution that might be problematic. So you might want to have someone look at this before you just send it off to production. But it's not an error. If the resolution would be lower than what I have in this file, it would probably be listed as an error. And in that case, it would really be a problem. So that's kind of the difference between warnings and errors again. However, the profile also states, the profile for this particular use of PDF states that in magazines, I don't want spot color in my document. So if there is a spot color, it will be listed as an error. Now, what you can do with that report that I have here, with this list of errors and warnings, is very much dependent on the Preflight software that you're using. But in PDF Toolbox, for example, I can open this up and I can, if I double click one of these lines, it will actually show me in the document with this red outline, it will actually show me in the document where that particular problem is caused. So what the object is that causes that particular error message. And then I could decide what to do with this. Now, let me go back and see what happens if I run this again, but I say analyze and fix. Now, if I say analyze and fix, the idea is that PDF Toolbox will not only check, but also run the fixes that are defined in that profile. And so I can save a new file on my desktop, and we'll see what the result is. And as you can see, the result is very different. What I now have is a set of lines that tell me which things were actually fixed in this document. And you can see that I still have a warning on resolution, and that's perfectly normal. I used image resolution as an example of something that you cannot fix. So that hasn't been fixed, and it's still a warning. But you can see that spot color is also still an error message. And why is that? Well, that is the case because in the Gantt PDF workgroup profile, there is no fix to do anything with a spot color. You could. PDF Toolbox is very much capable. If I go to Switchboard and I go to colors, for example, PDF Toolbox is very much capable of taking all spot colors and converting them to process. And that would fix this particular problem. That text that is now in a spot color would then be converted to CMYK, and I would no longer get the error message. The file is fixed. Problem is that converting from spot to CMYK is not something that the Gantt workgroup felt comfortable with to do in their specification that they developed. This was not something that they thought they could advise just anyone to do for all files in a workflow. So there are two things that you can do. In your workflow, you could use the magazine ads profile delivered by the Gantt workgroup and say, well, if that error occurs, I'll send the file back to the customer, or I'll take it upon myself to go into the switchboard, press this execute button here, and that will fix that spot color problem, and then I'm sure it's fixed, but I'm going to do that manually. Or what you could also do is modify that profile. And what you're doing then, to go back to my presentation for just a sec, what you're doing is either the choice of using the Gantt workgroup profile unmodified and then dealing with the problem, or building your own profile that is built on top of the Gantt workgroup profile, but that adds an additional fix in this case. And that is very easy to do in almost all Preflight software. I can simply select the profile here and I can say duplicates, and that will give me a copy of that profile. And in that profile, I then have the list of checks in the document and the list of fix-ups. And what I can now do is simply add a new fix-up in that list to convert all spot color to CMYK, and then I'm done with it. And then I have taken that Gantt workgroup profile and I have added my own fix on top of that, just as you can add your own checks in a profile and so on and so on. But you can see what list of fixes and checks I already have in that Gantt workgroup profile, and you can imagine that if you have to build that from scratch, it's going to be a hell of a lot of work to do that. If it's merely making a copy of that profile and adding one or two checks and fixes in there, that's much more easy. And the chance that you make errors while doing so is a lot smaller, right? So use those standards and specification profiles, copy them, make a duplicate for your own company, and modify them if you have to, but don't start building something from scratch. That's a very difficult thing to do. Now, going back to the report that I created here, there is one additional thing that I should probably mention, and that is that, well, this feedback that I get here is really nice. It tells me where the problem is, it tells me what things have been fixed and so on. But communicating that to a customer is much more difficult. Almost all Preflight software that I know has a way of communicating that information to a customer through a Preflight report. And that Preflight report comes in all kinds of different formats. In PDF Toolbox, I can create, for example, an XML report, and that's very useful if I have an automated workflow, because I can then use that XML to integrate feedback into a website or into an automation application or something like that. But I can also build my own PDF reports. And if I use the default one, well, actually, I think I will use one of these in here. This is, again, very application dependent, but most of these Preflight applications allow you to create a similar type of report. And this is just one example where a template is used. The template can contain your own colors that you want to use. It could contain your own logos or artwork for your company. And it can also show just the information that you want. And in this case, the warnings are not shown. It's only the errors that are shown, because the idea was that perhaps clients would get confused if there are too many items in there for things that have been fixed or things that are only warnings. So in this report, it's only the errors that are shown, some technical information about the document, and then some information about the inks that were used in the document. But this report in PDF Toolbox can be fully customized so that it contains exactly the information that you want in exactly the colors and company style that you want. And that, of course, it's much easier to then communicate back to a customer and to show them what kind of errors were encountered and what they should go back and fix. Okay, so this is about the information that I wanted to put in this webinar. As I said, it's an introduction webinar, so I don't have time to go into all of the details. I will conclude by saying that you can see this long list of profiles, and you can see how many standards you have here. You can see for PDFX, that's the one I wanted, for PDFX how many of these different numbers I have here. You can see under prepress how many different Gantt workgroup profiles, and that I have things that are labeled, if I open this up, things that are labeled 1v4, and then I have things that go back to Gantt workgroup 2012, I have 2015. There's a lot of these profiles out there, and it can be challenging to find out exactly which profile to use for which particular job in which particular case. And that's very interesting information to share with all of you, but this webinar doesn't give me the time to do so. So if you're interested in that part of the story and to go into a little bit more detail on what things are checked in profiles, what things are fixed in profiles, what are the possibilities, I would invite you to come back 2 weeks from now and subscribe to the Preflight Standard webinar. Like I said, if you go to 4ps.com and you go to events, you can already enlist for that one, but you'll also get an email invitation for that. But that's a subject that I would like to cover in much more detail in that webinar. So, short summary, we talked about Preflight, we talked about when to do that and how to do that, what standards and specifications are if you hear people talk about that, and how those are translated or built into Preflight profiles. And then we saw in PDF Toolbox how you can take a document, run a profile, either simply verifying or doing verifications and fixes, and what the result then is and how you can get that result back to a customer. So let me see at which questions you might have had during the webinar. Let's get those answered. First one is about, I think I mentioned that just now, about other webinars and how can I sign up. So go to 4ps.com. If you haven't been there, it's actually quite simple to find it. Simply go to 4ps.com, and under company there is a section called events, and all of our webinars are listed under the events section. There is one question from you, Philip, which is a little bit too specific, I'm afraid, to answer during this webinar. Can I suggest that you send me or send support a quick email with that, and then we can look at that offline. You can see my email address on the closing slide of the presentation. You can also reach support@4ps.com or support@calasoftware.com. Next question, how common is using Gantt workgroup profiles outside of the EU? Less common than we would want, probably. But what you'll find, Ira, is that in many cases the Gantt workgroup profiles are actually used without being advertised as such, and that's even the case within Europe. In many cases, it's the local country associations who communicate to their users how Preflight should be done, and in many countries in Europe, they advertise their own websites and the specifications and profiles on their own website. But in many cases also those that information is actually the same as the Gantt workgroup specifications. I know from a lot of big publishers and printers in the US who don't specifically tell people to use the Gantt workgroup specifications because that's often difficult in the US, but who will have guidelines on their website that are, and then profiles on their website for download even, that are very frequently the same of the Gantt workgroup, or in some cases are Gantt workgroup profiles with, on top of the Gantt workgroup stuff, additional company-specific checks and fixes. Looks like the Gantt workgroup profiles are not in Acrobat Pro. They most certainly are. If you go to the prepress, to the profile section in Acrobat Pro, even in DC, you should find the Gantt workgroup profiles there. If you don't immediately find them, then you can also download them from the Gantt workgroup website, which is, and that's a good one to know as well, which is gwg.org. Everything that you can download from the gwg.org website is free. And under resources, you have application settings, and those application settings are Preflight profiles, amongst other things, but also job options and so on. And what you also have is information on XMP job tickets for PDF workflows, and there are, and it's also really interesting, test suites. Again, output suite is a collection of PDF files that you can use to test whether your workflow or your applications behave correctly. If you don't find them in Acrobat Pro and what you have built in there, you can always download them from the Gantt workgroup website and then import them into Acrobat DC. In working with a standard profile, is it possible to remove one of the built-in checks? Yes, that is always possible. It takes it perhaps a little too far, but I'll very quickly show you something. So this is the standard PDF X1A profile. If I go to edit on that one, you should not do that actually. You should do duplicates, but I know what I'm doing. So if I go to edit on this one, then you'll see that it's very difficult to change anything here, but I can unlock those. And that's really is the trick that you're looking for. If you go to summary for that document, for that profile, sorry, I can click create customizable profile, and that will give you a profile where I can now see the whole list of checks and where I can remove any check that I want. Simply select that and remove that check from the list of checks in that particular profile. So yes, that is definitely possible. However, what I should also say is be careful when you do that. I'll go back to this drawing. If I have a Gantt workgroup profile and I add additional fixes or additional checks, there is never a problem. The file will always be compatible with the Gantt workgroup specification and thus also with the PDFX standard and so on. If you take away checks from a profile, from a standard profile, then you of course have the risk that files slip through the cracks and that PDF Toolbox says, yeah, this file is compatible with your profile, but it might in fact no longer be compatible with PDFX. Let me give you a concrete example. PDFX has a bunch of checks on the use of transparency. Transparency is not allowed in PDFX 1A files, I should say. Right? So if I open this PDFX 1A profile, I create a customizable profile from it, and I would remove all of the transparency checks, then the files that the profile says are okay might no longer be PDFX 1A compliant because I've removed essential checks from that profile. So adding things is normally not a problem. Adding restrictions is normally not a problem. Fixing things is normally not a problem. But once you start removing checks from a standard profile, you should no longer assume that you're compatible with that standard or specification. A very good point. Do you have any user guide to apply the fix-up according to the related problem? That's a very good question, but a very difficult one at the same time. The real answer is no. The best thing you can do is look at the profiles that you find inside of PDF Toolbox, and specifically the Gantt workgroup profiles, because what we've done in the Gantt workgroup is we try to come up with a set of pre-flight checks, but we also try to come up with all fixes that make sense for that particular profile as well. We're a little bit on the conservative side, so the number of fixes is not terribly high, but you can assume that all of the fixes that you see here make sense for that profile that I am looking at here. So that's the best thing that you can find in terms of documentation. Otherwise, if there are specific questions that you have about checks and fix-ups and so on, I would advise you to send an email to support. So again, support@4ps.com or support@calasoftware.com. We also do more lengthy training on PDF Toolbox, of course, and that typically takes a day or 2 days and gives you much more time to go into those details and ask questions. Ira, another question or a comment from you about print. We're not going to print, so at least on the surface, we really don't care about the color space. Nor care about ICC. Well, it really depends what you are doing, either online. I'm assuming it's online in your case. It really depends on what you're doing online or on mobile, for example, if it's not print, because color can be very important for those workflows as well. So I'm guessing it has more to do with the type of document and the type of workflow that you're in than actually with the fact that it's not print. But you can definitely, if you're thinking of going to online, what you should do is create a profile that, like you said, doesn't check for spot color, for example, but it would probably check for things like image resolution and such things. And you can definitely build profiles that contain a bunch of rules that are valid online rather than for print workflows. Okay, that looks to be the full list of questions that people asked, so that is good. That means I can conclude it from my side. Let me just put this slide on here again with the additional webinars coming up, especially, like I said a couple times, the evolutions in Preflight standards webinars, because those will go into substantially more detail on what is inside of those Preflight profiles. So have a look at those, subscribe if you're interested. And meanwhile, let me thank you very much of joining. This is the first webinar of 2016. At the same time, it's probably the best, one of the best attended webinars we've done in the last couple of years. So that's really good to see. We have plans to do a number of additional webinars on the more basic stuff in PDF Toolbox. So Preflight, but maybe also something that goes into a bit more detail on how to create profiles and so on. So certainly keep an eye on our website to see what webinars are coming up. If you have something that you would really like to see and that we haven't covered yet, or not enough in enough detail, but so if there is something that you haven't seen in enough detail, send me an email. I would be very interested to hear that. We're always looking for great topics for additional webinars as well. So thank you for joining. Let me wish you a very pleasant rest of the day, and I hope to see you back soon for one of the upcoming webinars. Thanks.